we are going to see the defeat and the end after the two Second World War. Dear students, here we see the German armies in the Second World War, which were moving towards victory. They were defeated. German armies were defeated in 1943 at Stalingrad. There, a famous battle occurred between German armies and Allied nations armies of Allied nations in 1943. Up to 1943, German armies were getting success. But in 1943, there is a shift, the victory which was in the hands of Axis powers that shifted to the Allied nations. So after this Battle of Stalingrad, people all over Eastern Europe, that is in Germany, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, in these nations, right? That is Eastern Europe. So in Eastern Europe, the people welcomed Soviet armies because throughout the Europe, Germany tried to establish its rule under the leadership of Hitler, who was a follower of and creator of Nazi ideology. Throughout the Europe, Hitler had formed several Auschwitz camps. Those are gas chambers to kill minority community people. So throughout the Europe, people were afraid of Hitler's rule. So in Eastern Europe, people who were under a threat of Hitler's rule, they welcomed Soviet forces, that is Russian forces. They welcomed Russian forces army that they helped the what people to liberate from the Nazi rule. So that led to what to call occupying the Berlin, which capital city of the Germany in 1943. When Germany capital was under the control of Allied nations, then Hitler and his friends, that is his close associates, they they escaped from the attacks of the Allied nations and committed suicide because they don't want to be captured and tried for trials. So, in that way, Germany was surrendered to the Allied nations. Then, this Germany, after its defeat, after its surrender, it was divided into two parts. One is the eastern part of Germany that turned to German Democratic Republic, in short GDR. Whereas western part of the Germany divided into Federal Republic of Germany. Germany was broken into two parts. In order to reduce its power, Allied nations made a division in Germany into East Germany, West Germany. East Germany turned to German Democratic Republic, German Democratic Republic, and that was under USSR. Federal Republic Germany was set up in a western part of the Germany that was under USA. So here what do we see? Their victorious nations have succeeded in defeating the Allied nations, right? And we see that Hitler committed suicide. That is the change. Then Germany broke out into two parts. This is the change we see, right? Coming to the Japan, Germany, Italy, these were in a group called Axis powers, right? So after the Germans defeat and it's a surrender with a commitment of suicide, with the commitment of totally western part of Germany was under America. Then coming to Japan, Japan which was continuing its war, Second World War not ended till then. You America, what to call here? Sorry, that Germany was surrendered, but Second World War not ended. There Japan continuing. So in the far east, at a completely at the east side, Japan is located, right? So there, USA thrown two atom bombs. That is a little by and a fat by. These are the names of atom bombs. America thrown on the twin cities of Japan. That is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When Hiroshima and Nagasaki of the Japan were completely smashed with the attacks of USA throwing bombs, Japan also surrendered to the America by August 1945. One is 6th August 1945, another is 9th August 1945. These are the dates America thrown atom bombs. So Japan also surrendered. Whereas American armies occupied Japan but allowed the Japanese emperor to rule it. So there in Japan they set up constitutional monarchy in the similar to England. What is meant by constitutional monarchy? There will be king to the nation, and such a king rules the nation according to the drafted constitution. So where the ruler rules the nation according to the constitution, that nation is to be called a constitutional monarchy. That such government we call constitutional monarchy. So there Japan set up a constitutional monarchy. And Japan was ruled by elected members. That elected members, the group of elected members will be in parliament. The parliament of Japan is called Diet. Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, collectively called parliament, right? In our India, we call it parliament. So the lower house, upper house in Japan collectively called Diet. So the parliament of the Japan is called Diet instead. So people elected the representatives to the Diet, and those representatives formed the government, and that government will rule the nation, okay, according to the constitution, through the head of the nation, who is king. That is to be called constitutional monarch, constitutional monarchy. Okay, that is a rule set in Japan. Okay, and here many of the Nazi members coming to Germany after end of the Second World War, many of the Nazi leaders were captured and they were taken to the court, that is Nuremberg court. At Nuremberg court, their trials were continued on the Nazi leaders. So this court given death punishment to the 11 Nazi leaders, and many other Nazi leaders were sentenced to jail for lifelong. Here, the punishment given for many Nazi members, that is imprisonment for life, is not enough. It's what you call when compared that punishment is not enough for those Nazi leaders. What punishment? Sentenced to the jail for lifelong. Why it is not enough? Because the cruelty and the brutality they followed during the Second World War, if you compare the brutality and cruelty the Nazi leaders followed during the World War II with that, then the punishment given to them is nothing, instant. So, though the justice happened, the punishment given to them was very less, instant. So, there we see that several changes have come in a world after the end of World War II. What are those changes? We'll see here. Understand? Here we call the changes which occurred after the two world wars, that is World War I and World War II. Those are called consequences of world wars. Nothing but the results of two world wars, World War I and World War II. Right? These two world wars have influenced the world society to a great extent, politically, socially, and economically. The world is influenced to great extent by the two world wars. These two world wars occurred in the first half of the 20th century, that is from 1900 to 1950. This is the first half of the 20th century, right? So the first half of the 20th century completed with the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Similar to League of Nations, which was created towards the end of World War I, United Nations organization also created at the end of Second World War. UNO, which is United Nations Organization. In short, UNO or UN, United Nations. This is created at the end of a Second World War. Now, what we are discussing, changes occurred after the Second World War, right? So it is, first thing is that United Nations Organization was created. This is the first one. And second thing is that large colonial empires, Britain had many countries under their colonial rule. Similarly, France, Japan, Italy, and Germany, they had set up many colonies. So colonial empires were established by these nations, and that was ended. It means Britain had ended its colonial empire. In the same manner, France too ended its colonial empire. So we see this is third change, that is end of the colonial empires. Okay, Britain, France, Japan, Italy, and Germany, they ended their colonial empires. Another result is that many colonial nations which were under colonial rule by 1950, they got independence. For example, India, it got independence by 1947. Indonesia by 1950, China 1949, Vietnam, Egypt, Nigeria, like these countries turned to independent countries after end of Second World War. This is another reason that many colonial nations have turned to independent countries. Understand? Britain, which was very powerful during the Second World War, which was very powerful. That is the first. It's a what to call first powerful nation in the world by the Industrial Revolution. That reduced. That has come to second place. That means in the world, the topmost powerful nation was Germany. Britain during the World War II, and that turned to second powerful nation. Then which is the first powerful nation? That is America, right? The end of Second World War made Britain to be the second powerful nation, and the first place, in the first position, that is the first place, we find here two nations, those we call here two superpowers. One is USSR and another is USA. These are the two superpowers emerged after Second World War. So Second World War ended the domination of the Britain, and USSR, USA, which were at second place, they have come to first place. They turned to two superpower blocks. World split into two bipolar worlds. One pole, that is USSR. Understand? What is that? USSR. Another pole, that is what that? USA. Understand? We see USA trying to get control on what you call the world with the capitalism. Understand? In that way, we see that two power blocks emerged after the Second World War. Okay, and the Germany, right, which was completely destroyed, turned to two nations. And here USSR, which also faced a great destruction during the Second World War due to the Hitler's attack. Hitler stated no, he was a staunch enemy of communism. So Hitler have gone for creating a lot of destruction to the communist Russia. Though there was enormous destruction, losses occurred to the USSR from the Hitler's attack, USSR rebuilt its economy. During the World War One time, it expanded a lot and built its economy. Again, after the end of the Second World War also, USSR rebuilt its economy. So with this, USSR prestige increased in the world. Okay, because two times it was affected greatly by two world wars and again reached to a supreme position. So with that changes and rebuilt of its economy, which is one powerful economy, made Russia to be glorified in the world. So the prestige of the Russia increased in world, and they turned to establishing socialist camp, right? The Eastern Europe and China, they formed a socialistic camp with the USSR. Western Europe founded with capitalism, that is a capitalist camp. Okay, so this is what a change we see towards the end of the world wars. Another change, what we see that here, there, near about 10 million people were killed in the First World War. 75,000 Indian soldiers, they fought on the side of Britain in Africa and Europe. They were died, and 20 to 25 million people died in Second World War. That means the destruction was very heavy in Second World War than the World War One. In World War One, there were 10 million people. 10 million people were killed, whereas in Second World War, 20 to 25 million people were killed. Most of the people who died in the Second World War men, and all they were under 40 years of age. Why I'm saying this point, because below 40 years of age, people we consider as a resource to the nation, because they have the ability to work. So they are the resource. So such a human resource which is below 40 years of age were killed in Second World War. Second World War have created the destruction and taking the life of 20 to 25 million people. It is a great destruction than the World War One, because during the Second World War time they used nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. These weapons they used after the World War One, especially in Second World War instead. So we see that their atom bombs they used. America had thrown two atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? So those were the powerful weapons. After this, some of the nations started a race for deadly arms. Though United Nations organization was created, in addition to that, these two power blocks, that is America and USSR. Okay, America with capitalism, USSR, that is the Soviet Union, with communism. They started a deadly race of arms and weapons, especially nuclear and chemical weapons. This was started after the Second World War. Understand? After the end of the Second World War, another result, that is a race for arms, especially nuclear arms and chemical weapons started. So world still continued to be under the threat of world under threat of the water destruction. They were under armed peace. There was no real peace, because every nation was in a competition of building weapons, increasing their army. This continued after the Second World War II. During the World War II, they used atom bombs, but after the World War II, they started building, that is nuclear weapons. So a race for nuclear weapons created the world as armed world. So armed world will not give peace. Instead of real peace, they set up a armed peace instead. Armed peace in the sense, peace is established with weapons, which is not real peace. Every nation is at a threat of using of nuclear weapons. If they use or by mistake anywhere the nuclear weapons are accidentally used, there would be total destruction. So no country was with a real peace. They were under the threat of the nuclear weapons and the total destruction and that is to be called here armed peace. Instead, this is the what armed peace was there in the second in the world after the Second World War. Then the nations which got independence, democratic principles asserted here. It means that the world had understood the nations which move with undemocratic governments. Germany, then in Germany, Hitler. In Italy, Mussolini. In Japan, totalitarianism. In Spain, General Franco with aggressive nationalism. These were undemocratic governments. The undemocratic governments have led to two world wars. So many of the nations which got independence from the colonial rule, they realized and understood the danger of undemocratic governments. This made the newly independent countries to go for establishing democracy in their nations. So several nations have given preference to form democracy. So democratic principles asserted. After the end of World War One, we see that several empires came to end. World War One ended Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire, German Empire, right? And in the same manner, we see Russian Empire was collapsed, and in place of Russian Empire, Russian Socialist Revolution occurred in Russia. That is, we have seen 1917 Russian Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution occurred there, and that ended the what Russian Empire. In Germany also, German Empire was overthrown and it turned to republic. This was the result after the World War One. In Turkey, there was Ottoman Empire under Sultan that was ended, and there they set up democratic secular state. These were the changes after the World War One, right? That created self-governing countries. But after the Second World War, the colonies which got independence, they turned to democratic nations. We see that several countries were independent after the Second World War in Asia and Africa. Just now I stated that is India, Vietnam, China, Egypt, right? Those are the what nations which were under colonial rule. They turned to independence, independent nations instead. So in this way, Second World War created independent nations, and throughout the world, the power which was with the colonial empires, that was changed. With the World War One end, Germany, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Turkish Empire, they came to end. Then the map of Eastern and Central Europe, this was redrawn, because redrawn in the sense that the Central Europe and Eastern Europe, we find several changes have come based on nationality and economic interest with one to another nation and military security. That means the people who are speaking one language and one culture, they turn to one nation. In that way, the Central Europe and Eastern Europe was redrawn. Okay, and when Second World War ended, then the map of the world completely changed. Instead, what changes has come here? Before to Second World War, there were empires: Britain Empire, right? France Empire, Russian Empire, what you call Japanese Empire. So these empires were engaged, and colonies turned to independent nations, right? That is the change after the Second World War. And during this World War One and World War Two, we see that women too participated, but there was no recognition to women. So women, they started fighting for their recognition and demanded right to vote should be given for women. In this way, women succeeded getting right to vote in 1918. Okay, there we see that the long lasting wars, that is world wars, industrial production, and other services are necessary in which women participated. When men were in the war at a war field, when all men were fighting in the war, then women worked in factories producing the goods, ammunitions, right? So there is a greater role of the women to get success for allied nations in World War One and World War Two. So women, they stated that they are not inferior to men, as a woman role is also great in World War during World War One and World War Two time. They demanded they should be given equal priority with men, because in most of the families men were at World War Two and World War One and World War Two. So at that time, women earned bread. They taking care of their family. That means they look after the children and old age people. Right? When men were at a war, so women raised their voice for equality and stand, so that they got right to vote by 1918. Right? After this, we see several international organizations were created. The first one is United Nations organization was created to establish world peace. It was formed on 24th October 1945. Okay, and this was created based on four principles. It stands for world peace, and also upholding the human rights, respecting the international laws, and to promote social progress throughout the world. To achieve its principles, United Nations organization is working with its agencies like UNICEF, that is United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, and UNESCO, United Nations Educational Scientific Cultural Organization, WHO, World Health Organization, International Labour Organization. All these are the agencies through which UNO trying to establish a peace and removing the wars, stopping the wars, and if there is a position to wage war, it is conducting the what bilateral discussions and making the world countries to follow the international laws, right? So UNO is working a lot for upholding the what world peace instead. Though UNO working to a great extent, we see that here America, Russia, they managed what to call to control the what activities of UNO when they had personal interest, right? That we will study in a next class instead. So here we see that their new international organization is created.